The loudest laugh in the room came right after my sister handed me an empty gift box on my own birthday. Then, minutes after I walked out, the entire estate lit up with flashing sirens. How does a harmless joke turn into a night people still whisper about in Boston? And why was my sister screaming my name like I'd just killed her dreams? My name is Courtney Harrison. I'm a financial strategist and forensic-level accountant by trade, the kind of person who notices what doesn't add up even when everyone else is distracted by champagne and chandeliers. And tonight, I'm going to tell you exactly how my birthday party turned into a courtroom, without me ever raising my voice. It started with an invitation that looked like peace. Valerie, my older sister, insisted on hosting my birthday at the Harrison estate. She texted me like we were close again, like she hadn't spent months treating me like a stain she couldn't scrub out. "Family is everything," she wrote. "Let's put the past behind us." If you've ever dealt with someone who knows how to weaponize kindness, you understand why my stomach tightened the moment I saw that message. Valerie didn't do peace. She did performances. She did optics. She did whatever made her look like the hero in front of the right audience. Still, I went. Not because I believed her, but because I'd learned something about my sister. If she wants you in the room, it's never for your comfort. It's because she needs you to play a role. The estate that night looked like something out of a glossy magazine. Iron gates, manicured hedges, a circular driveway lined with Bentleys and Rolls-Royces that gleamed under the porch lights. My modest sedan looked absurd sitting among them, like a cheap pen tossed onto a mahogany desk. I stepped out anyway. I wore a simple black suit, nothing flashy, nothing desperate. My hair was pinned back cleanly, no dangling jewelry, no bright colors. I refused to look like someone arriving to beg for forgiveness. I was there to observe, not to plead. At the gate, a guard checked my name twice. Not because he couldn't read it, because he wanted me to feel small. Inside, the air smelled like expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and fresh-cut flowers arranged in towering displays. Jazz played softly from a stage near the ballroom. Laughter floated in clusters like bubbles rising to the surface. And eyes, so many eyes, tracked me as I walked across the marble floor. People I once worked with nodded politely, but didn't step close. Women in glittering dresses leaned into each other, whispering behind their hands. Men in tailored suits looked at me like I was a risk to be managed. That was Valerie's magic. She didn't have to throw mud at you directly. She just had to make everyone believe you were already dirty. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, mostly to give my hands something to do. My fingers wanted to tremble. I didn't allow them, because I'd learned the hard way that in rooms like this, emotion is currency, and Valerie has always been a master at spending yours. Then Derek appeared. My brother-in-law has the kind of smile that never reaches his eyes. He's the sort of man who laughs too loudly at his own jokes and calls it confidence. He came toward me, holding a glass of red wine, already flushed as if he'd been drinking since dinner. He bumped my shoulder hard. The wine splashed down my blouse, soaking fabric and dripping onto my shoes like a bruise blooming in real time. Derek stared at the stain for half a second, then sighed dramatically as if I had inconvenienced him. "Oh no," he said loud enough for people nearby to turn. That was vintage. A few laughs rippled. Not big ones, just those small, safe laughs people use when they want to stay on the winning side. Derek lifted his eyebrows at me. "Try not to ruin the carpet, all right?" My chest tightened. A hot flash of anger rose in my throat, sharp, humiliating, human. But I swallowed it. I reached into my bag for a napkin and dabbed the stain slowly, carefully, like I was cleaning up a minor spill instead of a public insult. Then I looked Derek in the eye and held his gaze without blinking. I didn't smile. I didn't apologize. I didn't react. And for the first time, his smirk flickered. Because bullies feed on motion. They need you to flinch. When you don't, they feel exposed. Derek cleared his throat, muttered something about me being clumsy, and drifted away into the crowd like a man suddenly aware his audience might not be guaranteed. I exhaled quietly, letting my heartbeat settle. I told myself I could make it through the night. Smile, leave, no drama. Then the lights dimmed. The band stopped mid-song, as if someone had cut the cord. A spotlight swung across the room and landed on the stage, where Valerie stood in a gold gown that made her look like she'd been poured into money. She held a microphone like it belonged in her hand. "My friends," she said warmly, voice perfectly rehearsed. "Thank you for coming tonight. This evening is about celebration, about family, love, and generosity." Generosity. I almost laughed. Valerie scanned the crowd as if choosing the next person to bless. Then her gaze landed on me, sharp and satisfied. "And of course," she continued, "I couldn't let my dear little sister's birthday pass without giving her something special." The spotlight moved. It found me. My eyes stung under the harsh white light. The room went strangely quiet, not because they cared about me, but because they cared about what Valerie was about to do. "Courtney," she called sweetly, "come up here." My pulse beat slow and heavy. I walked forward anyway, the click of my shoes on marble sounding too loud in the sudden silence. I could feel people leaning in, hungry for something awkward, something entertaining, something to gossip about tomorrow. I climbed the steps to the stage. Valerie wrapped an arm around my shoulders like we were close, like she hadn't spent months trying to erase me. Her grip was firm, possessive, a reminder that in her mind, I was still something she owned. An assistant carried out a large gift box wrapped in shimmering red paper, topped with an extravagant gold bow. Valerie handed it to me with a flourish. "This," she announced into the microphone, "is the perfect gift for someone who has contributed exactly what she deserves." A few people chuckled, already sensing the punchline. "Go ahead," Valerie said. "Open it." I untied the ribbon slowly. I lifted the lid. The box was empty. For one breath, the room didn't know what to do. Then Derek let out a loud laugh from the side of the stage, and the laughter spread fast, contagious, cruel. People laughed harder because Valerie was laughing, and laughing with her was safer than questioning her. Valerie leaned into the microphone, smiling like she'd just delivered a brilliant joke. "See?" she said. "Empty. That's your future without me, Courtney. A big, beautiful zero." She paused, waiting. Waiting for tears, waiting for my face to collapse, waiting for the moment I'd confirm every rumor she'd planted about me being weak, unstable, dependent. But I didn't cry. I stared down at the empty velvet lining and felt something strange, calm. Not the calm of surrender. The calm of someone who already knows how the story ends. I looked up at Valerie and smiled slightly, not warmly, not kindly, just enough to make her hesitate. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, clean edges, heavy weight, the kind of thing that doesn't exist unless someone has been patient. The laughter faltered. I placed the folder inside the empty box. Silence rippled through the crowd like a sudden chill. Valerie's smile froze. Her eyes narrowed. She tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "What is that?" she whispered, not into the microphone. I closed the lid gently, like I was sealing something sacred. "You were right," I said clearly enough for the microphone to catch. "It was empty." I snapped the box shut. "And now it isn't." Valerie's fingers tightened around the microphone. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I leaned close to her ear, my voice soft enough that only she could hear the next line, the line that made her blood drain from her face. "It's the truth you buried," I whispered. "And you're about to watch it dig its way out." Then I handed the box back to her and stepped away from the stage. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I walked with my head high, straight through the stunned crowd toward the grand double doors. Behind me, paper rustled. A sharp inhale. And then Valerie screamed. Not anger. Terror. I didn't turn around immediately. I pushed the doors open and stepped into the cold night air, letting it hit my face like a baptism. As I walked down the stone steps, the first siren wailed in the distance. Then another. Blue and red lights began to flash against the estate walls, painting the mansion in colors Valerie never expected to see on my birthday. And the last thing I heard before the doors shut behind me was my sister's voice shaking, broken, calling my name like she'd just realized the game was over. 6 months before that night, before the empty box and the screaming and the sirens, my life was still measured in spreadsheets, deadlines, and the steady rhythm of my father's voice in board meetings. People think wealth protects you. Like money is a wall. Like a mansion gate can keep betrayal outside. They're wrong. Sometimes betrayal grows inside the house, eating from your table, wearing your last name like a disguise. My father, Richard Harrison, built our construction empire from nothing but stubborn pride and sleepless nights. He wasn't a soft man, but he was a fair one. And despite Valerie's charm and Derek's polished lies, he trusted me with the one thing that mattered most: the truth in the numbers. I was the person who could glance at a quarterly report and feel when something didn't breathe right. I knew which projects were strong, which were bleeding, and which were being dressed up for appearances. Valerie hated that about me. She liked attention, grand entrances, charity galas where cameras flashed. She treated the company accounts the way some people treat an unlimited credit card: swipe first, ask later, smile through it. I'd spent years quietly cleaning up behind her. And I thought I could keep doing it, because I believed family meant we would catch each other before we fell. Then, the meeting happened. We were in the middle of reviewing final numbers for the Harbor Project, a multi-million-dollar development that would anchor our company's reputation for the next decade. The boardroom smelled like coffee and polished wood, and the conference table was heavy, mahogany, solid, expensive, built to last. My father sat at the head, glasses perched low on his nose, tapping his pen as he listened to projections. I was presenting cost allocations when I noticed his hand stop moving. At first, I thought he was just thinking. Then I saw the color drain from his face. His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "Dad?" I said softly, pausing mid-sentence. His eyes widened, not with confusion, but with fear. He tried to inhale, and it sounded wrong, like air couldn't find its way in. The pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the table. Then he collapsed forward. The sound of his body hitting the table was a sickening thud I still hear in my dreams. For a second, nobody moved. Powerful men in tailored suits froze like mannequins. Someone gasped. Someone stood up so fast their chair fell backward. I remember my own voice screaming for help. I remember my hands shaking as I pressed my fingers to his wrist, searching for a pulse beneath his dress shirt. I remember thinking, no, not like this. Not in front of them. The ambulance came fast, lights cutting through the city like warning signs. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lighting and frantic footsteps. Doctors spoke in careful tones, as if soft words could soften tragedy. "Massive stroke," one of them told me. "He's in a coma." Coma. The word dropped into my chest like a stone. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I sat in the waiting room, staring at a vending machine I couldn't bring myself to use, listening to the constant beeping from behind closed doors, bargaining with God, the way people do when they have nothing else left to negotiate with. Valerie visited once on the first day. She came in wearing sunglasses indoors, hair perfect, heels clicking like she was walking into a photo shoot. She kissed my cheek lightly, not like a sister, but like a politician greeting a supporter. "We'll be okay," she said. "I'll handle things." I didn't argue. I didn't even understand what she meant yet. On the third day, she returned. This time, Derek was with her. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent back then, and he carried himself like the hospital belonged to him. He smiled at nurses like he was charming them, but his eyes were already measuring the room. Security cameras, staff routines, who could be influenced. They didn't sit. They didn't ask how I was. Valerie went straight to the hospital administration desk and handed over a document. "Power of attorney," she said smoothly. Dad signed it before he lost consciousness. I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "Let me see that." Valerie hesitated just long enough to remind me she didn't have to obey me anymore, then held it out. I scanned the paper. It was official looking, printed cleanly, stamped. But the signature? The signature looked wrong. My father's handwriting was bold, consistent, confident. This was shaky, uneven, like it belonged to a man forced to sign while half sedated. "This isn't his," I said, voice tight. "He would never sign this without talking to me. Without his lawyer." Derek chuckled softly, like I'd said something cute. "He didn't need your permission," he replied. "He needed someone capable of making decisions." I turned to the administrator. "You can't accept this. He's in a coma." The administrator's expression was uncomfortable. We have to follow legal documentation. If you want to contest it, you'll need a court, Derek finished for her, smiling. Valerie slid her sunglasses down her nose and looked at me like I was a problem she'd finally found the right tool to fix. I'm in charge now, she said, quietly but clearly, of Dad's care and of the company. My throat tightened. This is insane. No, Valerie replied. This is reality. That day, she barred me from making medical decisions. She restricted my access to information. Nurses who used to greet me warmly suddenly avoided my eyes, afraid of losing their jobs. I told myself I could still protect the company. That, at least, I could keep my father's legacy stable until he woke up. The next morning, I went straight to the office. My badge didn't work. Security stopped me at the entrance. Orders from management, they said. I walked past them anyway, because I was still naive enough to think my name meant something inside those walls. Inside, the atmosphere was different, cold, stiff, tense. People looked away when I approached. My assistant's desk was empty. Valerie's new staff stood in the hallway like decorative guards. I made it to the executive suite and pushed the door open. Derek was sitting in my father's chair, feet on the desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand like it was a throne. Valerie sat on the couch, scrolling through a catalog for private jets, smiling as if shopping could erase grief. I stood there, stunned. "What are you doing?" I asked. Valerie didn't even look guilty. She looked amused. "Running things," she said, "since you're clearly too emotional." I stepped forward, forcing my voice to stay steady. Dad trusted me with negotiations, with budgets. The harbor project, Derek waved his glass. The harbor project will be fine. I'm not worried about fine, I snapped. I'm worried about fraud. Valerie finally looked up, eyes gleaming. Careful, Courtney. Accusations like that can ruin reputations. I didn't realize then how literal she meant it. I went back to my desk, my old desk, and opened the weekly expense logs. I told myself I was checking routine numbers. But within minutes, my gut tightened. Transfers. Irregular. Large. Repeated. I traced them like I was following footprints in snow. It took hours, line after line, account after account, until the trail ended at offshore accounts with shell company names designed to disappear into paperwork. Millions. My hands went cold. I printed everything. Screenshots, logs, timestamps, bank references. I built a binder thick enough to snap a desk in half and marched back into the executive suite with my heart pounding. I slammed the binder onto my father's desk. "Explain this," I demanded. For the first time, Derek's smile tightened. Valerie leaned back slowly, like she was enjoying a show. "You went digging," she said. "How predictable." "This is theft," I said. "You're bleeding the company." Derek laughed and took a sip of whiskey. "Prove it." "I can," I said. "And I will. I'm calling the lawyers." I reached for the phone. Valerie slid a folder across the desk with one finger. "Before you do," she said softly, "read this." I opened it, and my world tilted. Printed emails sent from my account discussing leaks, forged documents, sabotage, things I would never write, things that made me look like the criminal. My mouth went dry. "These are fake," I whispered. Valerie smiled. "Are they?" Derek leaned forward. "The board already saw them. Voted, actually." The air vanished from my lungs. Valerie stood, walked around the desk, and stopped close enough that I could smell her perfume, sweet, expensive, suffocating. "You're going to sign a waiver," she said, voice like velvet over steel. "You're going to give up your inheritance and your shares." I stared at her. "No." Her expression didn't change. "Yes." Then she delivered the line that made my blood freeze. "And if you don't," she murmured, "Dad's care becomes complicated. Machines are expensive, Courtney. Sedatives are expensive. Maybe it's time we stop pretending we can afford everything." I couldn't breathe. "You wouldn't," I said, voice cracking despite my efforts. Valerie tilted her head. "Wouldn't I?" In that moment, I realized I was not negotiating with a sister. I was negotiating with someone who saw my father's life as leverage. My hands shook as I picked up the pen. Not because I wanted to surrender, but because I had no choice. I signed. Because if the price of fighting was my father's death, I couldn't pay it. Valerie watched the ink dry, like she was watching a victory speech. You have 1 hour, she said, already turning away. Pack your things, security will escort you out. I walked out of the executive suite in silence, carrying nothing but a small box of personal items and a grief so heavy it felt like it had bones. That night, I stood outside the building that once felt like my home and realized something terrifying. Valerie didn't just want my inheritance. She wanted to erase me. And 2 weeks later, with my accounts frozen and my name destroyed across the industry, I would walk into the glass tower of the one man she feared most, not to beg for help, but to learn how to fight back without losing my soul. 2 weeks after Valerie signed my life away with a single forged folder, I learned what it felt like to become invisible in a city that used to greet me by name. Boston didn't change. The streets still shone after rain, the harbor still smelled like salt and diesel, and the glass towers still reflected the sky like nothing in the world could ever crack. The only thing that changed was me, how people looked through me instead of at me, how doors that once opened with a smile now stayed shut with polite excuses. My bank accounts were frozen, my credit cards declined. Even my phone line nearly got cut off until I paid with the last cash. I had loose bills I'd stuffed into a drawer back when I still believed I had a future. I moved into a basement apartment in Southie, so small the ceiling pipes felt like they were pressing down on my shoulders. The walls sweated when it rained. The air smelled like mildew and old water, and at night the radiator hissed like it was warning me not to get comfortable. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd find work quickly, that my reputation would speak louder than Valerie's lies. But Valerie's lies had a better microphone. I applied to firms where I'd once been offered partnership tracks. I reached out to board members who used to shake my hand and call me the backbone. I even swallowed my pride and contacted recruiters who had begged me to consider leaving the family business in the past. Every response sounded the same. We're going in a different direction. We've decided to pause hiring. This role has been filled. We're concerned about the rumors. Rumors. That single word became a wall no resume could climb. Valerie didn't just remove me from the company. She rewrote me into a cautionary tale. An unstable sister, a disgraced accountant, a thief who tried to profit from her father's illness. She made sure people believed my name was radioactive. After the 5th rejection in 3 days, I sat on the edge of my mattress with my laptop balanced on my knees, staring at the screen until the words blurred. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. Hunger was easier than humiliation. I thought about my father lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak for himself. I thought about Valerie sitting in his chair, wearing his power like jewelry. I thought about Derek's smug face when he watched me sign away my inheritance like I was signing a confession. And then I thought about the only person in Boston who made Valerie's voice lose its sweetness. Julian. Julian Mercer was Valerie's biggest business rival, and the man our social circle loved to call ruthless, the way they might call a storm, inconvenient. His company had clawed its way into contracts we used to dominate, and he had a reputation for winning by being smarter, faster, and colder than everyone else in the room. Valerie hated him because she couldn't control him, and I needed someone Valerie couldn't control. That was my last card. I stood in front of Julian's glass skyscraper on a gray morning that smelled like wet pavement and exhaust. The building was all sharp angles and reflective surfaces, like it had been designed to remind you that softness wasn't welcome inside. I walked into the lobby with my shoulders squared, even though my hands were shaking inside my coat pockets. The receptionist looked up, professional smile, ready until I said my name. Harrison, I introduced myself. Her smile faltered. Her eyes flicked down to my resume like it might burn her. Then she picked up the phone with a speed that told me she'd been warned. Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared at my sides. One of them gestured politely toward the elevators. Not to escort me out, to escort me up. The elevator ride felt like a slow ascent into judgment. The higher we went, the quieter my thoughts became. Not because I was calm, but because fear has a way of compressing everything into one tight point. When the doors opened, I was led into Julian's office. glass walls, steel desk, a city view that made people feel small. Julian sat behind the desk like he belonged there the way kings belong on thrones. He didn't stand. He didn't offer a seat. He didn't pretend to be kind. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger who knocks on your door during a storm. Cautious, suspicious, slightly annoyed. "So," he said, voice smooth as a knife, "Valerie finally sends a Harrison to my office." I inhaled slowly. "I'm not here on her behalf." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "That's funny, because I don't believe you." He picked up my resume, glanced at it once, and tossed it onto the floor like it was trash. The paper slid across the polished wood and stopped at my feet. "Your family has played dirty with me for 5 years," he continued. "You think I'm going to hire you because you walk in here looking brave?" My cheeks burned, but I kept my face still. I'd been humiliated enough times to learn that dignity isn't something you feel, it's something you perform until it becomes real again. I stepped forward, over my resume, and placed my hands flat on his desk. "I'm not asking for trust," I said evenly. "I'm offering leverage." Julian's eyes narrowed. "And what leverage could you possibly have?" I didn't dramatize it. I didn't beg. I simply told him the truth that would matter to a man like him. "I know where Valerie hides her bad debts in the financial reports," I said. "And I know how she's planning to win the harbor project bid next week." The change in his expression was immediate, subtle, but sharp. Hostility shifted into calculation, interest. The harbor project was the contract everyone wanted. It wasn't just money. It was a decade of stability, a public stamp of legitimacy, a trophy big enough to reshape the market. Julian stared at me for a long moment, weighing whether I was bait or brilliance. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick stack of documents, disorganized, messy, filled with notes and tabs. He dropped them in front of me. "You have until sunrise," he said. "Prove you're useful." He didn't give me a team. He didn't give me comfort. He gave me a challenge designed to break someone who was bluffing. I took the papers and walked into a small conference room. The lights buzzed overhead. The coffee pot smelled like it had been burned too many times. Outside the glass walls, the city glowed quietly, as if it didn't care whether I survived the night. I sat down and began to work. Numbers have always been my anchor. When everything else in my life felt like it was collapsing, math stayed honest. A spreadsheet doesn't care who your sister is. A ledger doesn't care about rumors. It only cares whether something balances. Valerie's proposal was sleek on the surface. She knew how to make documents look impressive. But I knew her habits. I knew the places she always cut costs because she assumed she could buy her way past the consequences. And there it was, buried in environmental compliance fees, safety projections, inspection schedules. Valerie had underreported costs so aggressively that the only way her numbers worked was if she planned to avoid the rules entirely. She wasn't budgeting for compliance. She was budgeting for bribery. My fingers moved faster as adrenaline sharpened my focus. I cross-checked municipal requirements, calculated real-world costs, and built a revised projection that exposed the risk like a spotlight on a rotting foundation. I highlighted the exact sections where her proposal would fail under legal scrutiny. I created a clean summary designed for people who didn't understand finance, because the smartest evidence is the kind anyone can grasp in one glance. Around 3 a.m., I paused and stared at my reflection in the dark glass wall. I looked exhausted, pale, haunted. But behind my eyes, something had returned. Purpose. This wasn't just about winning a contract. This was about proving I wasn't what Valerie had told everyone I was. It was about building a path back to my father, back to the truth, back to myself. Just before sunrise, the door opened. Julian walked in, tie loosened, coffee in hand. He didn't speak at first. He just sat down and flipped through my work. Minutes passed. The only sound was the rustle of paper. Then he looked up. For the first time, his expression wasn't contempt. It was respect, reluctant but real. "You're either very smart," he said, "or very desperate." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Both. Julian's mouth twitched, like he almost smiled. Almost. "Get in the car," he said. The city council meeting that morning felt like walking into enemy territory. Valerie arrived wearing confidence like perfume. Derek trailed behind her with that same smug grin, carrying her proposal folders like they were trophies waiting to be claimed. Then Valerie saw me, sitting across the table, beside Julian. Her face didn't crumble completely. Valerie was too trained for that, but the color drained from her cheeks, and for 1 second her eyes flashed with something raw. Fear. Julian presented the revised numbers calmly, professionally. He didn't accuse. He didn't shout. He simply laid out reality. And reality made Valerie's proposal look not just reckless, but dangerous. The council members murmured, exchanging looks. One of them asked Valerie a question she couldn't answer without admitting the truth. Valerie's smile tightened, Derek's jaw clenched. And then the decision was made. Julian's firm won the harbor project bid. Valerie sat still, hands folded, like she was holding herself together through sheer will. Derek leaned close to her and whispered something that made her eyes burn brighter. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt something colder because I knew Valerie wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat quietly. An hour later, Julian's office phone rang. Even from across the room, I could hear Valerie screaming through the receiver threats about lawsuits, accusations about betrayal, promises to bury me under legal pressure until I couldn't breathe. Julian laughed into the phone, amused in a way that made my spine straighten. When the call ended, he looked at me. "You're not here to play nice," he said. "No," I admitted. "I'm here because my father is in danger." Something shifted in Julian's gaze, less business, more human, just for a second. He slid a contract across the desk. "Strategic advisor," he said. "You work for me now. And if Valerie comes for you, she comes through me." My fingers trembled as I signed, not because I was afraid, but because I finally felt the ground under my feet again. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving. I was positioning myself. And I didn't know yet that my real turning point wouldn't be another contract or another meeting. It would be a phone call, late at night, from a terrified voice whispering from inside a hospital supply closet, telling me my father was waking up, and Valerie was rushing to keep him silent. That was the moment I realized the war wasn't about money anymore. It was about time. The call came on a night when the rain didn't fall, it attacked. It slammed against the windows of Julian's office, like something trying to get in, like the sky itself had decided that silence was no longer an option. I was still at my desk, reviewing projections, trying to anchor myself in numbers the way I always did when everything else felt uncertain. Then my phone started vibrating. Unknown number. Massachusetts General Hospital. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it stumbled, like it didn't want to continue. Valerie had made one thing very clear after taking control. No one from the hospital was allowed to contact me. Every update about my father had to go through her. Every decision, every change, every whisper of hope filtered, controlled, reshaped. So, if the hospital was calling me directly, something had gone wrong. Or something had finally gone right. I answered. "Hello?" For a second, there was only static. Then a voice low, hurried, trembling. "Miss Courtney, it's Brenda." I stood up so fast my chair rolled back into the wall. Brenda. The nurse who had taken care of my father for over 20 years. The only person in that building I trusted not to lie to me. "Brenda, what's happening?" I asked, already afraid of the answer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm in a supply closet. I can't talk long. Your father? He's showing brain activity. He's waking up." The world narrowed to that single sentence. Waking up. I pressed my hand against the desk to steady myself. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said quickly. "The doctors saw it. He responded to stimuli. But Valerie, she came in with new orders. Increased sedatives. She wants to keep him under." A cold wave rushed through me, sharper than anything I had felt before. "She's trying to stop him from waking up," I said. Brenda didn't answer directly. She didn't need to. "You have to come," she whispered. "Now. I can't delay them much longer." The call ended. For a moment, I just stood there, my phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence that followed like it might give me instructions. Then I turned. Julian was watching me from across the room, his expression unreadable but alert. What happened? He asked. My father, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He's waking up. Valerie is trying to keep him sedated. Julian didn't ask for proof. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys. Let's go. The drive felt unreal. Rain blurred the streets into streaks of light and shadow. The wipers moved in frantic arcs, barely keeping up. I sat in the passenger seat, hands clenched in my lap, every muscle in my body coiled tight with urgency. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I was thinking about time. When we reached the hospital, the entrance was exactly as I feared. Two of Valerie's private security guards positioned near the elevators, their posture relaxed but their eyes sharp. They weren't there for safety. They were there for control. Julian stepped out of the car first, straightening his coat like he was about to walk into a negotiation, not a confrontation. Stay close, he murmured. Then he walked through the front doors and headed straight to the main desk. I need to speak to the hospital administrator, he said loudly, his voice carrying across the lobby. Now. The receptionist blinked, startled. Sir, if you could just… No, Julian cut in smoothly, but firmly. This concerns legal liability, and I'm not going to repeat myself. Within seconds, attention shifted. Nurses glanced up. A supervisor approached. Voices layered over each other in confusion. Julian had created exactly what we needed. Noise. Distraction. While everyone focused on him, I moved. Not fast enough to look suspicious, not slow enough to lose time. I slipped past the desk, down a side corridor, and into the staff entrance Brenda had once shown me during a quieter visit. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain someone would hear it. The service elevator was empty. I pressed the button for the 4th floor and watched the doors close, sealing me into a box with my fear. When they opened again, the ICU hallway stretched out in front of me, quiet, sterile, filled with the soft, relentless beeping of machines that measured life in seconds. I moved carefully, keeping my head down, my steps controlled. Room 405. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. And there he was. My father. For a moment, I didn't recognize him, not because he had changed, but because I had. The man who had once filled boardrooms with his presence now looked smaller, fragile, like the weight of everything had finally caught up to him. But his eyes were open. Not wide, not panicked, just present. They stared at the ceiling, unfocused at first, like he was testing reality. Then, slowly, they shifted. And found me. Dad. My voice broke before I could stop it. I stepped closer, every movement careful, like I was afraid he might disappear if I moved too quickly. I took his hand, and even through the cold, even through the weakness, he squeezed back. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held them in. I needed to listen. I needed to understand. He tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled everything. Gently, I lifted it just enough to let his voice through. It came out in fragments. Courtney, I'm here, I whispered. I'm right here. His gaze locked onto mine, and for a moment, everything else faded. The machines, the hospital, the months of silence. I'm sorry, he breathed. No, I said quickly, shaking my head. You don't have to. I didn't see, he struggled, his grip tightening weakly. Valerie. The pain in his eyes said more than his words ever could. I know, I said softly. I know. He pulled me closer, his forehead almost touching mine, his breath uneven but urgent. Listen, he whispered. I leaned in. Garage, old wheelchair, key inside. My mind raced, trying to follow. Key? I repeated. He nodded slightly, every movement costing him. Safe. Deposit. Everything. Henderson. The name hit me like a spark. Henderson. His lawyer. The one person Valerie hadn't been able to control completely. There's proof, he forced out. Real will. Records. Don't let her. His voice faltered. I won't, I said firmly. I promise. His eyes searched mine, as if trying to make sure I understood the weight of that promise. Then, footsteps. Sharp, fast, familiar. My entire body went rigid. Valerie. I lowered the oxygen mask back into place, my movements quick but careful. My father's hand tightened around mine for a second longer before I gently let go. "Rest," I whispered. "I'll fix this." The door handle rattled. I turned, scanning the room in a split second. No hiding places, no time. Then I saw the window. Narrow, metal frame, slightly open. Without thinking, I climbed onto the ledge and pushed it wider. Cold air rushed in, carrying the sound of rain and distant traffic. I swung one leg over, then the other, stepping out onto the fire escape just as the door began to open. I pulled the window shut behind me and crouched there, breath held, rain soaking through my clothes within seconds. Inside the room, Valerie's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Where is she?" she demanded. I pressed myself against the cold metal, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Brenda's voice answered, calm but tight. "There's no one here." Valerie moved closer. I could hear her heels against the floor, the subtle shift of fabric, the pause as she assessed the room. For a moment, I thought she would check the window, but she didn't, because in Valerie's world, no one climbed out into the rain to escape. No one chose discomfort over control. Eventually, her footsteps moved away. I stayed there longer than I needed to, just to be sure. The rain blurred everything, turning the world into a smear of gray and silver. But inside me, something had sharpened. A direction. A purpose. When I finally climbed down and reached the ground, I didn't go back to Julian immediately. I didn't go home. I drove straight to the estate. Not through the main gate. I parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, cutting through overgrown paths and shadows Valerie had long since stopped caring about. The estate loomed ahead of me, grand and untouchable, but I wasn't heading for the front door. I was heading for what Valerie ignored. The garage. It stood at the far edge of the property, forgotten and neglected. The wood was warped, the paint peeling, the air inside thick with dust and the smell of things left behind. Valerie hated old things. She saw no value in anything that didn't shine. That was her mistake. I stepped inside and let my eyes adjust to the dim light. Piles of broken tools, discarded furniture, rusted frames. It was like walking through a graveyard of everything my family had once used and then abandoned. And there, tucked behind a stack of tires, was the wheelchair. My father's old wheelchair, the one he used years ago after a minor surgery. The one Valerie had insisted on replacing because it looked outdated. I knelt in front of it, my hands trembling not from fear this time, but from anticipation. "Key inside," I whispered to myself. I ran my fingers along the seat cushion, feeling the seams, the stitching. Then I pulled out my pocket knife and carefully sliced along the edge. For a second, there was nothing. Then, cold metal brushed against my fingertips. I reached inside and pulled it out. A small silver key. Simple. Unremarkable. But in that moment, it felt heavier than anything I had ever held. Because this wasn't just a key. It was the beginning of the end for Valerie. And as I stood there, in that dusty garage, rain still dripping from my clothes, I realized something with absolute clarity. My sister thought she had already won. She thought she had buried the truth deep enough that it would never find its way back. But she had forgotten one thing. The truth doesn't disappear. It waits. And now, I finally knew where to find it. The key felt heavier than it should have. It was small, silver, almost ordinary, something you could lose in the bottom of a purse and forget about for months. But as I stood there in that dusty garage, rainwater still dripping from my sleeves, I knew this wasn't just a key. It was my father's last move. And I was the only one who knew how to play it. I didn't waste time. I left the estate the same way I came, quietly, through shadows Valerie never bothered to watch, and drove straight into the city as dawn began to bleed into the sky. The streets were still half asleep, traffic light, the world unaware that somewhere between midnight and morning, everything had changed. The First National Bank opened at 9. I was there at 8:30. I sat in the car, engine off, hands wrapped around the key, staring at the glass doors like they might disappear if I blinked. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked different, not softer, not calmer, but clearer. For months, I had been reacting. Now, I was moving. When the doors finally opened, I walked in without hesitation. The marble floors, the quiet professionalism, the polite smiles, it all felt like a different world from the chaos I'd been living in. "I need access to a safety deposit box," I said at the counter, my voice steady. The banker asked for identification, verified my credentials, and led me into a private room. No drama, no suspicion, just procedure. That was the thing about systems. They don't care about family drama. They don't care about lies whispered in boardrooms or reputations destroyed over cocktails. They care about proof. The banker placed the box in front of me and stepped back, giving me privacy. My fingers hesitated for just a second before I slid the key into the lock. It clicked. A small sound, but it echoed in my chest like a door opening after being sealed shut for too long. Inside the box was exactly what my father had promised. A thick, leather-bound ledger, worn at the edges, but meticulously maintained. And beside it, a sealed envelope pressed with my father's wax crest. I exhaled slowly, my hands tightening around the contents. This wasn't hope. This was evidence. I didn't open it there. I didn't trust the quiet of that room to hold what I was about to uncover. Instead, I placed everything carefully into my bag and left the bank with a sense of urgency that buzzed under my skin. My next stop was Henderson. If there was one person Valerie hadn't been able to manipulate, it was my father's lawyer. He was old school, precise, and loyal in a way that couldn't be bought. If the truth had a witness, it would be him. His office smelled like polished wood and old paper, the kind of place where time moved slower, where decisions carried weight. When I walked in, he didn't greet me with surprise. He greeted me with understanding. "You found it," he said quietly. I nodded and placed the ledger and envelope on his desk. He didn't rush. He never did. He put on his glasses, opened the ledger first, and began reading. Minutes passed. The silence stretched. I watched his expression change not dramatically, but in small, precise shifts. His brows tightened, his jaw set, his eyes sharpened behind the lenses. By the time he reached the middle of the ledger, the room felt heavier. "This is detailed," he said finally. "Very detailed." "It's everything," I replied. "Every transfer, every account." He nodded, flipping another page. "Your father documented more than I expected." "He knew," I said softly. "He must have known something was wrong." Henderson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he set the ledger aside and picked up the envelope. The wax seal cracked under his fingers with a quiet snap. Inside was the will. Not a copy. The original. He unfolded it carefully, scanning each line, each signature, each date. Then he reached for a file from his cabinet and cross-checked the notary records. I held my breath, because this was the difference between suspicion and certainty. After what felt like an eternity, Henderson looked up. "This is valid," he said. The words hit me like a release I hadn't allowed myself to feel. "Completely valid," he continued. "Executed properly, witnessed, filed correctly." "And Valerie?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Henderson's expression hardened. "Has no legal claim to override this," he said. "None." For a moment, I just sat there, letting that reality settle. All the power Valerie had taken, all the authority she claimed, all the decisions she made, built on nothing, on forged documents and intimidation. But Henderson wasn't finished. "This," he said, tapping the ledger, "goes beyond inheritance. This shows a pattern of financial misconduct serious enough to warrant investigation. And if what you're telling me about your father's medical situation is accurate..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "We proceed carefully," he said instead. "No impulsive moves. Everything must be documented, filed, and handled through the proper legal channels. If we rush, she'll spin this into a family dispute and bury it in delays." I nodded. For the first time since this began, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about precision, about timing, about making sure that when Valerie fell, she couldn't twist the story into something else. My phone vibrated. Valerie. The name flashed across the screen like a ghost I couldn't avoid. Henderson glanced at it, then at me. "Answer," he said quietly. But don't give her anything. I took a breath and picked up. Courtney! Valerie's voice flowed through the speaker, sweet and controlled. So different from the screaming I'd heard weeks ago. I've been thinking, she continued. We've had misunderstandings, and I'd like to fix that. I said nothing. There's a gathering tonight, she went on. A small celebration. Investors, partners, family. I want you to come. I almost laughed. Of course. The IPO was approaching. She needed the image of unity. She needed me visible, but in a way that made her look generous, forgiving, superior. I have a gift for you, she added, her tone softening. A proper one this time. I stared at the ledger on Henderson's desk, at the proof of everything she had done, and I understood. This wasn't an invitation. It was a stage. I'll be there, I said calmly. Valerie's satisfaction was immediate. Good. Don't be late. The call ended. Henderson leaned back in his chair. She's planning something. I know, I said. And you still intend to walk into it? I met his gaze. Yes. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Then we make sure you're not walking in unprepared. The rest of the afternoon moved with quiet efficiency. Copies were made. Documents were organized. Evidence was secured properly, nothing hidden, nothing manipulated, everything handled the way it needed to be if it were ever questioned. No shortcuts, no risks. Just truth, structured and ready. By the time I left Henderson's office, the sun was already lowering, casting long shadows across the city. I returned to Julian. He listened as I explained everything, the ledger, the will, the invitation. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She wants to humiliate you, he said. Yes. Then let her try. I tilted my head. That's it? Julian's eyes met mine, sharp and certain. She built the stage, he said. You decide what happens on it. There was something reassuring about the simplicity of that. I went home, showered, and changed into the same black suit I had worn before. Clean, controlled, unapologetic. I packed my bag carefully. Inside it, I placed the folder copies of the ledger, the will, everything Henderson had prepared. Not loose, not messy. Organized. Final. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't see the woman who had been pushed out of her own life weeks ago. I saw someone who had learned how to wait, how to listen, how to strike without raising her voice. When I arrived at the estate that evening, the driveway was already full. Lights glowed from every window. Music drifted into the night air. Everything looked perfect. Exactly the way Valerie wanted it. I stepped out of my car and adjusted my sleeve, feeling the weight of the folder in my bag. She thought she was inviting me back to break me in front of an audience. She thought she was in control of the narrative. But as I walked toward the doors, past the guards, past the polished facade of the life she had stolen, I realized something she hadn't. The story she planned to tell tonight was no longer hers. By the time I stepped back into the Harrison estate that night, I no longer felt like a guest. I felt like the final piece in a story that had been building long before Valerie ever picked up a microphone. The ballroom looked even more extravagant than before. Crystal chandeliers blazing overhead, polished marble floors reflecting the soft gold light, and clusters of well-dressed guests moving like carefully arranged pieces on a board. Laughter drifted through the air, smooth and practiced, the kind that belonged to people who believed they were watching a performance, not realizing they were inside one. I walked in quietly. No dramatic entrance, no hesitation. Just steady steps and a calm that had taken months to build. The whispers started immediately. Is that her? I thought she disappeared. Valerie is so generous. I didn't react. Because I had already learned the truth. People will believe whatever story is easiest to repeat. And tonight, I wasn't here to correct them. I was here to end the story. I moved through the crowd slowly, letting my presence settle without forcing it. My hands were steady, my breathing even. The folder in my bag rested against my side, not heavy, not intimidating, just certain. Derek found me first. Of course he did. He always liked being the first to poke at something he thought was weak. He approached with a drink in hand, his tie slightly loosened, his confidence loud enough to carry across the room. He didn't even try to hide his smirk this time. "Well," he said, glancing me up and down, "look who crawled back." A few nearby guests turned subtly, pretending not to listen. I met his gaze without flinching. "I was invited," I said simply. Derek chuckled, swirling his drink. "That's the thing about charity. It always comes with conditions." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound private while still being overheard. "Try not to embarrass yourself tonight," he added. "We're hosting important people." I tilted my head slightly, studying him the way I used to study financial reports looking for inconsistencies, for cracks beneath the surface. "You should take your own advice," I said calmly. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, but discomfort. He laughed it off, louder than necessary, and turned away to find easier company. I watched him go, not with anger but with clarity. How presented, because men like Derek only feel powerful when they think they control the ending. And tonight, he didn't. I reached for a glass of sparkling water again, more out of habit than thirst, when I felt a shift in the room. The music softened, the lights dimmed, and just like before, a spotlight cut through the space and landed on the stage. Valerie. She stood there in another flawless gown, this one silver, shimmering under the light like she had wrapped herself in success. She held the microphone with practiced ease, her smile wide, her posture perfect. "My dear friends," she began, her voice warm and commanding, "thank you all for being here tonight. As you know, our company is entering an exciting new chapter, and I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate than with the people who have supported us along the way." Applause followed. Of course it did. Valerie knew how to create moments that looked genuine, even when they were carefully constructed illusions. She spoke about growth, about resilience, about family. And then, her eyes found me, right on cue. "And speaking of family," she continued, her tone softening just enough to sound emotional, "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge my sister, Courtney." The spotlight shifted. It found me instantly. The room turned. Dozens of faces. Curious. Expectant. I felt the heat of their attention, but it didn't burn anymore. "Courtney," Valerie called sweetly. "Come up here. I have something for you." I walked forward, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. The same path I had taken before, but this time, I wasn't walking into her trap. I was walking into my timing. I climbed the stage and stood beside her. Up close, I could see the tension behind her smile, the way her fingers tightened slightly around the microphone. She didn't trust me. Good. That meant she felt something was off. An assistant brought out the gift box. Red, shimmering, gold ribbon, almost identical to the one from before. Valerie took it and handed it to me with a graceful flourish. "I wanted to give you something meaningful," she said into the microphone. "Something that truly reflects your journey." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. They were ready. They were waiting. "Go ahead," she said. "Open it." I untied the ribbon slowly, letting the moment stretch just enough to build anticipation. Then I lifted the lid. Empty. The reaction came right on time. A few confused murmurs, then Derek's laugh loud, sharp, and the rest followed like a wave. People laughed harder when they saw Valerie smiling, because it told them it was safe. Valerie leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You see, Courtney," she said, "sometimes we need a reminder of where we stand. And I thought this would help you understand that without me." She paused, letting the silence sharpen the blade. "You have nothing." The laughter peaked. And then, it stopped. Not because I told them to, but because I didn't react. I stood there, looking into the empty box, and let the quiet settle around me like a second skin. Then I reached into my bag. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out the folder. The same folder I had carried through rain, through fear, through every step that had brought me here. The room shifted. You could feel it. The laughter thinned. Conversations died mid-breath. Even Valerie's smile faltered, just slightly, as she watched me place the folder inside the box. I closed the lid gently. "You're right," I said, my voice calm, clear enough for the microphone to carry across the room. It was empty. A pause. And now it's filled with something much more valuable than anything you could have given me. Valerie's fingers tightened around the microphone. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her composure cracking at the edges. I leaned closer. "Just enough. So everyone can hear you fall," I said softly. Then I straightened, took the box from her hands, and pressed it firmly back against her chest. "Go ahead," I added, my tone almost kind. "Open your gift." I didn't wait. I turned and stepped away from the stage. The crowd parted slightly as I walked through it, confusion replacing amusement. People glanced at each other, uncertain now, their laughter gone, replaced by something else. Doubt. Behind me, I heard it. The rustle of paper, a breath catching, and then, silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like the room itself is holding its breath. I reached the doors. My hand touched the handle, and then it came. A scream. Raw, sharp, uncontrolled. Not anger, not outrage. Fear. Valerie's voice shattered through the ballroom, stripped of its polish, stripped of its performance. This isn't possible." I didn't turn around immediately. I pushed the doors open and stepped outside. The night air hit me, cool and steady, grounding me in a way the ballroom never could. But I paused, just for a second, and I looked back. Through the open doors, I saw the scene unraveling, guests stepping back, whispers turning into urgent murmurs. Derek lunging toward the stage only to stop short as others held him back. Valerie stood frozen, clutching the box, papers spilling from her hands like the truth finally refusing to stay contained. And then, movement at the entrance. People stepping aside, voices firm, controlled, not chaos. Authority. I didn't need to see more, because I already knew what would happen next. Instead, I stepped down the stone stairs, each step lighter than the last. Behind me, the world Valerie built was collapsing, not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely, exactly the way it needed to. As I reached the bottom of the steps, my phone vibrated. I glanced down. A message from Henderson. 2 words. Filed. Served. I exhaled slowly. Everything had been set in motion. Another message followed, from Brenda. "He's stable. Doctors are monitoring closely. No changes allowed." My eyes closed briefly. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Relief. Not victory. Not satisfaction. Just release. Because this was never about humiliating Valerie the way she humiliated me. This was about ending the control she thought she had over everything, including our father's life. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked toward my car. No rushing, no looking back, just forward. Because the truth didn't need me to stand there and watch it unfold. It was already doing that on its own. And as the distant sound of sirens finally cut through the night air, echoing across the estate, I realized something simple. Valerie had given me an empty box to prove I had nothing. But she had forgotten something important. An empty box is the perfect place to put the truth. When I look back on everything that happened from the moment my sister handed me that empty box to the second the truth finally caught up with her, I realize this story was never really about revenge. It was about patience, about knowing when to stay silent and when to let the truth speak louder than any emotion ever could. Valerie believed power came from control, from humiliation, from making others feel small. But in the end, it wasn't anger that brought her down, it was evidence, timing, and the courage to endure long enough to use both. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this. Sometimes the strongest response isn't immediate. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding everything together, waiting for the right moment to change everything. So I want to ask you, if you were standing in my place, holding that empty box while everyone laughed, would you have stayed calm? Or would you have fought back right away? If this story made you feel something, if it stayed with you even for a moment, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Revenge Tale Network. There are many more stories waiting, stories where truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way back into the light.